All right, well, thank you for joining us this morning, Emily. Really glad to have you here today. I think to start off our conversation, it would make sense if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm.
Sure. My name is Emily Kildow. I've been in the sustainability industry for close to 20 years. I like to call it a residency in real estate, where I started with design and construction. I moved into consulting specifically for sustainability. Then I moved to operations, and then went into development, but very special development, urban tech development, so very focused on data. Now into a fully integrated REIT, which is, I'm the Vice President Director of Sustainability for SL Green, the largest commercial real estate landlord in New York City. And really the purpose of the firm is to maximize benefits for stakeholders. So maximizing value, and that also aligns with sustainability initiatives. So it's been a really exciting transition. I feel like my sort of residency has come to fruition into this place where now it's this position where I have insights to a lot of different kind of components of the business.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, we're really excited to have you as a part of this project and to have the participation of SL Green in Benchmark 8760. And so this is kind of a nice lead into my next question for you, which is, why does this initiative, Benchmark 8760, matter to you and to the real estate industry as a whole, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, the quintessential "you cannot manage what you can't measure" adage is boring and old, and also sort of antiquated in that people just think data is data. And so I think the progression of how the laws have kind of happened in New York City is very telling, that we haven't figured it out, and we haven't figured out everything that is impacting our energy use and our carbon impact, essentially. So you talk about 84, and it's like, okay, you have to actually show what your energy use. It's supposed to tell you what it is, right? Okay, now we can have an apples to apples comparison, as they say, benchmarking. And then you go into, okay, but now you have to expose that. Local Law 33, total energy use, gives you a grade. Doesn't really mean that much if you're really looking at it. And then you move into 97, that is all about your carbon impact. And so if you start to gauge the actual letter grade versus their penalties for Local Law 97, these things do not align. There's something that's not cohesive about the way that we're looking at energy. And so I think this is the next step to give us another insight into what does this all mean in energy usage versus carbon impact versus usage versus, just how we're using our buildings and what is the best way to use them.
Yeah, this idea of building performance, right, is now evolving and changing, and it's almost like, our existing tools and performance standards, like Local Law 97, for example, haven't quite caught up with that new definition of building performance, which in theory should include a lot more than just energy use per square foot or some of the metrics that we've sort of gotten used to over time. And so this brings me to my next question that kind of gets into the details of hourly building data, specifically, and what the value is in having that granular level of information. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's as important as anything to understand what you're actually looking at. And we know that, we think we know, that the climate and the temperature outside is affecting the way that we're using energy. There's the issue of people using energy at different times. We've created initiatives, we being, the greater entities of energy savings, like NYSERDA, for example, demand response programs, the ISO demand response programs, knowing that there are differences between what it means to use energy in 1 hour versus another. So I think just having at least a granularity where we can glean insights to make the changes necessary to be able to potentially, maybe it's about flattening our energy use, maybe it's about moving when we're using energy around, so that it's not necessarily just about savings, but it's more complicated, more nuanced, but we don't have the information really all wrapped up in a nice little bow with some nice visualizations to be able to showcase what that actually means.
Right. So, Emily, why do you think that this initiative, Benchmark 8760, resonates with you as an individual, but is also potentially valuable to your business?
I think it is about having the data to be able to showcase what we are actually doing as a company. the idea of using energy on a square foot basis is just not telling of a true story of energy efficiency, as you've pointed out, in the way that the platform is being built. But really, it's about being able to showcase what are all of the things that you're doing to maximize the efficiency as it relates to sort of the output of the building. Densification, making sure the energy is being spent in a way that's fruitful, that's actually being used. You're not just air conditioning floors with 40% occupancy.
Right.
You know, it's the, like, how are you actually using the energy piece of it? But it's also about being able to tell that story against other buildings in a way that is really showing an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
So occupancy is really the thing that we should be focusing on, that's driving energy use to be able to maximize the usage of our spaces, which we don't even talk about what it means from an embodied carbon standpoint, and all of the space utilization and traffic and parks and all the things that we could be using from a sustainability aspect that we're not even talking about here. But if you focus and try to create the efficiencies around a per person basis, then you're really telling the story of how buildings are serving a community.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And occupancy is one of those core aspects, those core data streams that we're bringing into our proof of concept platform with Benchmark 8760 for exactly the reasons you mentioned, right? There are things that are driving energy beyond square footage, right? We see that especially here in New York City, where there's a lot of densification, right? And yet still, we're not necessarily taking that into account, it would appear, in our benchmarking and in our performance standards. So hopefully what comes out of the proof of concept platform here is the ability to kind of show that you can collect that information, and that, you know, hopefully it could be used in a beneficial way to get that real picture of performance that you're talking about here, and the way that it actually serves the community, serves the building occupants.
Right, and it's sort of putting it's asking the question, do we look at energy the right way? And if we're talking about, during the pandemic, the amount of energy that was saved when nobody was in the building, you know, there is a real disconnect between what should have been saved and what was actually saved.
So true.
So I think the idea that maybe asking the question of, well, you know, no occupancy means we save X amount of energy, and it's like, but that shouldn't be a static number. So are we designing the right way? Are we pushing the way that we're thinking about building and zoning our office spaces in a way that is actually going to get us to our goals, our carbon goals?
Yep, totally agree. So last question for you here. You know, what are you hoping would be the outcome, or what would you like to see come out of this initiative? And specifically the proof of concept platform, right? If people could take one thing away, one or two things away, what would you like those things to be?
I mean, I want it to create a fairness to the way that we look at energy. I think it's really about, as we move forward and the world is really coming to a place where they want to see how are you impacting the climate, and how are you comparing against your peers. And until we create a way of being able to tell that story apples to apples, it's really, it just sort of confuses people, and it messes with the messaging, and people then aren't actually focusing on the right things as far as energy use is concerned. Just trying not to use energy in a space to save an EUI, that doesn't make any sense. Trying to manage your energy and think about how energy actually works across the macro level, the ISO, the time of use, the occupancy, the weather, all of these different components, that's when you can start to get to potentially a place where you can compare apples to apples and then learn from others, really tell that story.
Got it. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you spending some time with us and talking to us about the participation that we're grateful to have in the initiative here. And we look forward to the outcomes with you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We do too. Thank you.